Okay, so everyone's kind of holding their breath right now, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the U.S. election is right around the corner, and it feels like the whole world is watching,
It's true.
waiting to see what happens. And it's not just about America picking a president, is it? It's about the ripple effects that'll be felt globally, no matter who wins.
Yeah.
We're talking two potentially very different leaders, two completely different visions for how America interacts with the rest of the world.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
So in this deep dive, we're going to really try to understand how big those global impacts could be. We've got some really interesting insights from a Fast Times News podcast script that we'll be looking at today. It's got a lot of expert opinions.
I think what's so fascinating here is how this one event, the U.S. election, can touch literally every corner of the world.
Right.
You know, it really is like that butterfly effect thing. Like a butterfly flaps its wings and then
Exactly.
a hurricane happens.
It is mind-blowing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So let's focus in on one of the biggest potential flashpoints, NATO. Remember that image of Biden just walking through Kyiv with Zelensky?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, talk about a powerful statement.
It-
Huge, very public display of U.S. support, not just for Ukraine, but for the whole NATO alliance.
Right. And, you know, it makes you think, what if Trump gets back in?
Oh, gosh.
I mean, he's threatened to yank the U.S. out of NATO before. And remember, we're talking about the U.S. footing the bill for 2/3 of NATO's defense spending right now.
Yeah, that's a crazy thought. I mean,
Huge responsibility.
huge responsibility. And to think about it just suddenly going away,
Yeah.
that's unsettling, to say the least. What do you think that would do to Europe? Would they be scrambling to try to fill that void?
Oh, absolutely. You'd see European nations forced to really ramp up their own defense budgets. And that could lead to a lot of friction within the alliance. You might have some countries ready and willing to step up, but others just couldn't handle it. And then you'd have resentment, and, that weakens NATO, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And that brings us to another crucial point, right? We're talking about these global conflicts themselves.
Yeah.
Even with the U.S. trying to exert its influence, situations like we've seen at Ukraine or in Gaza, they're incredibly difficult to resolve, even with the U.S. involved.
Yeah. And I think that's because the nature of conflict is changing. It's not just about armies and tanks anymore. It's economics and diplomacy,
Yeah.
and even controlling the narrative online, information warfare. So these conflicts, they're like tangled webs
Wow.
with threads that go way beyond any single battlefield.
So if these conflicts are getting more complex, does that mean the U.S. is kind of losing its ability to actually be a peacemaker in these situations?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And to be honest, the answer really depends on who sits in the Oval Office. Okay, let's switch gears for a second and talk about another big player on the global stage, China. Trump's approach, with the tariffs, all those
Yeah.
disruptive tariffs, it's the complete opposite of what we might see with the Harris administration.
Yeah, and it's funny because both sides, they say they're tough on China,
Right.
but their methods are just night and day.
Totally different. I mean, think about it. Trump's policies, those could have triggered a global economic earthquake, right? Imagine trade wars escalating, supply chains getting disrupted, and suddenly everything costs way more. Harris, on the other hand, might go for a more measured approach, focusing on diplomacy, building alliances to counter China's influence.
So it's not just about being tough.
Exactly.
It's about being the right kind of tough.
Exactly.
And while we're on the subject of high-stakes decisions, we got to talk about the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Climate change. This election feels like a make-or-break moment, not just for the U.S., but for the entire planet.
Couldn't agree more. Let's look at Trump's record, right? He pulls the U.S. out of the Paris Agreement, a global pact to tackle climate change. I mean, that was a huge blow to international cooperation. Plus, he rolled back all those environmental regulations, the limits on pollution from power plants. I mean, that stuff directly contributes to more greenhouse gases, right? Now, picture Harris. She reverses those decisions, rejoins the Paris Agreement, pushes for stricter emission standards, invests in renewable energy. That would be a huge shift in U.S. climate policy, and it could inspire other countries to step up, too.
Right. It's a really good reminder that this election goes way beyond U.S. borders. And it's not even just about the policies themselves. It's about the human cost of those policies.
Absolutely. Think about someone like Martin Griffiths, right? This guy is a veteran conflict mediator. He's seen firsthand how U.S. decisions can impact millions of lives. It could be providing humanitarian aid in war zones or supporting refugees. The U.S. has a moral obligation to be a force for good globally.
Yeah.
And the next president has the power to shape how that obligation is fulfilled.
So we've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? From NATO to climate change. And it's so clear that this election, it's about so much more than just choosing a president. It's about the U.S. choosing its role in the world.
You're right, it's a crossroads. And the whole world is holding its breath, waiting to see which path the U.S. will choose. Whatever the next president decides, it will have consequences for years to come, maybe even decades.
And it makes you think, in these kind of crazy times, what does it actually mean to be a global leader? And how can the U.S. use its influence to make the world a better place, a safer place? These are questions that I think we all need to be thinking about, no matter where we live or how we're voting. The answers aren't easy, but they're definitely worth fighting for.
Yeah, they are.
So that's it for today's deep dive.
See ya.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.